Tonight we're going to begin in our discussion group. We had a comparison that was going down, and we've been doing that for a few weeks. Of course, we had the Bible series, and then we had other events, our singing service, and of course the young men leading the Sunday evening service, and then we get back to our comparison. We're talking about the way that God interacts with mankind, and we've taken two encounters with God that occur, in this case, in the Old Testament and the New Testament, between Nebuchadnezzar and Peter. You may be looking at the screen going, why did he put it that way for Nebuchadnezzar? Well, it's an insanely long name. And also, this is how I remember how to spell it, Nebuchadnezzar. So being really honest with you in that. Big name. However, what I would like for us to do is I'm going to do the introduction tonight. And then if you haven't been here during our discussion groups, after we conclude our worship service and I do an introduction here, we're going to break out into various groups. There'll be one that'll meet here in the auditorium. Alan Bush will take another class, and it's still down in the elders' office. Rodney Sills will be taking one upstairs in the multi-purpose room, and then there's several from the elementary ages and down. Usually we have one for the teens, but they weren't able to be here tonight. So those in the youth group and teens, I would encourage you to choose either in here, the elders' office, or upstairs in the multi-purpose room, and also encourage you to please speak up and contribute in those situations. You're smart people, so we'd appreciate that for sure. So we've got two guys tonight that are really interesting, Nebuchadnezzar and Peter. And as we go through, I'm going to break down the different dreams and visions, the way that God communicated to people in these two encounters. Now, God's encountered people before, and he's certainly revealed himself and things about the kingdom throughout history. Obviously, the burning bush would be an incredibly popular one. But even the way he appeared on Mount Sinai before the people of Israel in Exodus 18, 19, 20, and through those passages as well is amazing. And sometimes he would speak directly to people, like he would to many of the patriarchs, or even the way he would speak to Elijah or any of the prophets and communicate to them and through them. But tonight we have two different men, very different men, and as we go through them, the comparing and the contrasting and trying to navigate the way that God spoke to them and why he spoke to them and what it was about the kingdom, that's what I want us to think about as we prep for our discussion groups. So if you would, go ahead and turn over to Daniel chapter 2. And if you can mark that, you can also look at Acts chapter 10. I have those both up on the screen. And we're going to look at the visions and the dreams that God uses to communicate. Now, again, very different men. One, king of Babylon. The king of Babylon. I mean, that kingdom must have been so amazing and so incredible that it's going to be featured rather strongly in the dream that he has, and it gives us some sense of the way it worked on the scale of global politics and global power. And if we're not familiar with those countries and the way those kingdoms function, this gives us some indication. Historically, I lean pretty heavy towards the Greeks and the Romans, and for me, those are big cultural and artistic moments in history. Don't agree with everything about them, but they're huge and very influential, certainly in the Western world. Babylon, I don't connect with it as well. But if it's given the preeminence that it is in this story and in this dream, wow, it must have been magnificent. And God has given a dream specifically to the king of that land who's accomplished many powerful things and had many great military conquests and really was a major force shifting the state of the world. At the same time, God is going to communicate through a vision about his kingdom to a man who was just a fisherman. Just a fisherman. And in the consideration of geopolitical power and artistic and cultural influence, there is a vast difference between Nebuchadnezzar and Peter. Spiritually, there is a vast difference between Nebuchadnezzar and Peter. Nebuchadnezzar was working on some things, and occasionally he would get there, but Peter was a disciple. Peter was an apostle. Peter had his struggles, for sure. But Peter walked with Jesus, and Peter was doing the work of the church, certainly here in Acts chapter 10. So his vision has a little bit different purpose. These men are separated by well over 600 years. And Daniel chapter 2, we find at the beginning that this dream is given to him, Nebuchadnezzar. He's king of Babylon. And it says it's here in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Historically, most scholars think that Nebuchadnezzar reigned in about 605 BC was when he began his reign. So we're looking at about 603 BC for those of you that are of a history mind there. And we'll begin here. He has this dream and it deeply troubles him. So much so that he calls all the wise men, the soothsayers, the magicians, the Chaldeans, and says, I need you to explain this to me. You must tell me what this dream is. And they say, well, tell us your dream. And he says, no. You tell me the dream and its interpretation. He's pretty hardcore about it too. He would give them no hints. And if they get it wrong, if they just lie to him and try to give him some tell, they are going to be punished incredibly, basically put to death. And then their houses burned to a heap. But if they are correct in their interpretation, he's going to reward them fantastically. And of course, they complain and they say, no man can do this. Verse 11 is really interesting in Daniel chapter 2, because they reply back to him after asking again and say, it is a difficult thing that the king requests. There is no other who can tell it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. They get it partially right. It's not gods. It's God, singular. And God is going to explain it to him through Daniel. He's going to reveal this through Daniel. Daniel's got such a heart for people that when he finds out that a decree has been put out to kill the soothsayers and the wise men and such, Daniel's like, I got to take action. He's thinking of not just him and his friends, but he's also thinking of these men too. This doesn't seem like a very just reason to put people to death over a dream, and you feel unsettled by it. Well, God reveals it to him, the meaning and the interpretation of the dream. He blesses God and praises God for this revelation to understand it, and then he proceeds to go talk to King Nebuchadnezzar. And this is the dream in Daniel chapter 2. Let's begin in verse 31. He says, you, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. These aren't light words he's using here. It was surpassing the magnificence of most things that existed. And that's quite a thing to say when you are literally in the kingdom of Babylon. He is literally using the word awesome. There's something very elevated about this image. Hold on to that. There's a contrast coming. This image's head was of fine gold. Its chest and arms were silver. Its belly and thighs were of bronze, and its legs of iron. Its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together. It became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found. And the stone that struck the image, it became a great mountain that filled the whole earth. This was the dream. It troubled him deeply. But Daniel goes on and gives the interpretation as revealed by God. He said, this is the dream. Now we will tell you the interpretation of it before the king. You, O king, are the king of kings. For the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field and the birds of the heaven, he has given them into your hand and has made you ruler over them all. You are this head of gold, Babylon. But after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours. This is the chest and the arms of silver. And then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, as much as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. And like iron that crushes, the kingdom will break in pieces and crush all others. Whereas you saw the feet and the toes partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. Yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with the ceramic clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile, this fourth kingdom. And as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay, they mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of these kings, fourth kingdom, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. This is the interpretation. He says it's certain and sure. What's amazing about this is God is giving a message about his kingdom. This is about the kingdom of God, and it's going to come, and it's going to exist, and it's going to exist forever. He's revealing it at this moment through this man, interpreted by Daniel. There's a lot of implications built into that. You have this great image, a gold and silver and bronze and iron and clay. And these represent kingdoms, massively influential and powerful kingdoms. But even though they are of great splendor and magnificence, there's going to come this stone. And I love this. I love the fact that this stone, and it's not cut with hands. It doesn't tell us the substance of the stone. It doesn't tell us the shape of the stones. It was just not made with human hands. This is of a divine origin. And it's going to come down by the power of the Creator and will crush. And it will overcome. And it will establish itself. And as great as you thought the image of the statue might be with the gold and the silver, the bronze and the iron, as great as that might have been, it pales in comparison to this stone, which not only knocks it down, but grows and grows and grows and fills the entire earth as a kingdom that will never fail and will exist forever. It's a message of hope. But it's a humbling message as well. And this is a message to the king that he should respond to this, and he did quite favorably. He had this moment of humility in which he praised God and made these decrees and such. At that time, he would have another dream later in chapter 4, worth reading about. But it was also a message to the people, God's kingdom. God has a plan. Just as George prayed in his prayer, that God has an eternal plan, that Jesus would come, and Jesus came to establish a kingdom, this was going to happen. Well, let's now skip over to Acts chapter 10. A little bit shorter vision, but the kingdom has come. And now the people are active in the kingdom, the church. But there's a monumental message that's given now to Peter, this fisherman who's an apostle, and he's gone in the city of Joppa, and he's up on a rooftop, and he's praying, and about noontime, he's hungry, and he receives this vision from God. And it's an interesting one because he grew up a Hebrew. He grew up of the Jewish faith, and now he's a Christian man, a follower of Jesus. And this sheet comes down, and it's filled with these animals that were by Jewish law unclean. And there's this voice from heaven telling him what to do with them. All right, let's skip down here. We'll start in verse 12 of Acts chapter 10. In it, that sheet that came down, were all kinds of four-footed animals of the earth, wild beasts, creeping things, and birds of the air. And a voice came to him and said, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." Peter said, "Not so, Lord, for I have never eaten anything common nor unclean." Maybe he thought it was a test. And a voice spoke to him again, the second time, "What God has cleansed, you must not call common." This was done 3 times. And the object was taken up into heaven again. Now, while Peter wondered within himself what this vision which he had seen meant, behold, the men who had been sent from Cornelius earlier in the chapter had made inquiry for Simon's house and stood before the gate. And they called and asked whether Simon, whose surname was Peter, was lodging there. And while Peter thought about the vision, they have him thinking about this. He's processing it, right? While he's thinking about this, while he's wondering that these other events are taking place, a very short period of time. For Nebuchadnezzar's dream, it took place over centuries before it would unfold in Acts chapter 2. But in Peter's situation, he's now encountering the effect, the expectation of his vision, the challenge to it, which is very interesting. He's thinking about it. God's helping him in this situation as well. I love the engagement of God to help him be successful and be able to obey in this matter. It says Peter went down to him. In verse 19, while Peter thought about the vision, the Spirit said to him, "Behold, 3 men are seeking you. Arise therefore and go down and go with them, doubting nothing, for I have sent them." Doubting nothing because these were going to be Gentile men, leading him to teach a Gentile man. Now, it had been forbidden up until this point, as far as we have record, to teach the Gentiles. And so he's telling them, go down, do this thing. It's going to connect to your vision. It's going to be pretty tough to process because you were the first. This is a pioneering moment. It's a monumental shift in the direction of the kingdom in which it will be open to everybody. But don't fear that, Peter. This is what God is wanting. It's being communicated. How humbling. What a demonstration of the authority of God, the grace of God, that his kingdom would be open to all. And so Peter goes down. And the Spirit's not done helping him understand this, because even as he's teaching Jesus, the Spirit comes down and falls on them. And the Bible says, like it did in the beginning, Acts chapter 2, when the Spirit came upon them as well. It was confirming that this was the right thing to do. And there was witnesses. Again, a monumental, earth-shattering shift in what God wanted for his kingdom. That's the dream and the vision that we have between Nebuchadnezzar and Peter. Two very different men. But God's communicating messages about his kingdom through them, and they have an impact on us even today. There's a lot to discuss, and there's a lot to unfold in this, and I hope you've got some questions generating in your mind so we can really dive into this with some depth. It's worth it. We need to think about who God expects us to be. How, even when it's challenging, that we should be obedient to God. It was certainly challenging for Nebuchadnezzar. He had his own sort of emotional stability to overcome, and maybe his own pride to overcome. It would have been challenging for Peter, because this is the first time he's had to encounter this kind of teaching. He wouldn't have been without some level of knowledge of the way the other Christians would respond to this, and they did in Acts chapter 11. But he still did what was right and what was pleasing to God. That's a big challenge for us today. Always do, no matter where we are and in what situation, live a life that's pleasing to God. As we close out here tonight, I would like you to think about that. How is your life pleasing to God? Have you given it to him? Have you dedicated it to him? Do you get up each day, and when you start your first prayer in the morning, do you say, God, help me to be your man. Help me to be your woman today. Help me to be a person of faith today to please you. Or is that thought so very, very far from your mind, or even very, very far from your heart, and you haven't even given him the consideration? I would really challenge you to rethink the direction of your life and how close you are to God, because that's a choice that you get to make. God wants us to be spiritually successful and drawn near to him. God's equipped us with his word. He's equipped us with the church. He's equipped us with prayer. He's equipped us with so many things that we can draw close to him. We simply have to make the choice. We have to do our part. Tonight, if there's a way that we can help you do your part, that we can be an encourager to you, that we can love you and help you and pray for you, that we can direct you closer to Jesus in the Word, if there's a way that we can be there for you, let us know as we stand and as we sing.